COVID-19 pandemic. This is a critical moment in the outbreak response. For us all, the fastest way for us to get through this is to act together.
In the spring of 2020, as a microscopic but deadly virus brought the world to a grinding halt, the President of the United States fixed his ire on an unlikely target.
We will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs.
The organization, once lauded for ridding the world of smallpox and bringing polio to the brink of eradication, has become a political flashpoint. Great Decisions investigates the global response to COVID-19, explores how geopolitical rivalries are spilling over into the realm of public health, and asks how the international community can prepare for the next pandemic. The World Health Organization. Next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by the Herford Foundation, PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP, and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
In the last week of May 2020, as an anxious spring rolled into a tragic summer, the 100,000th American died from COVID-19, and Donald Trump stepped into the Rose Garden to prosecute his case against the People's Republic of China.
Chinese officials ignored their reporting obligations to the World Health Organization and pressured the World Health Organization to mislead the world when the virus was first discovered by Chinese authorities.
At issue were the early weeks of the outbreak. American officials alleged that China was too slow to warn the rest of the world about the dangers of the new virus.
Certainly probably November and December of 2019, there was likely an outbreak happening in Wuhan that China hid from WHO and really only let WHO know on December 31st, 2019. And much of January, as WHO tried to get more information, China was hiding that information and just not being as forthcoming as it should have been.
It wasn't a shortage of proper rules and regulations that allowed China to obstruct the World Health Organization investigation for too long. It was a problem of China, first and foremost, being obstructionist, not being transparent, being more concerned about its reputation than about averting a global pandemic.
We now have a name for the disease, and it is COVID-19.
It's quite clear that China was relying on WHO to delay the response to the COVID-19 and also to understate the severity of COVID-19 in the early stage. And I think Beijing has made it very clear that they don't care who's responsible as long as China is not held responsible.
As COVID-19 exploded into a worldwide pandemic, some experts worried that the international response was leaderless and uncoordinated.
It requires coordination at every level, globally, nationally, and locally. And we're seeing a real patchwork of responses that, frankly, is undermining our ability to beat this virus.
There's not a clear global leader in the fight against COVID. In some ways, WHO is the closest that we have, and I think they're pretty valiantly trying to play that role, but they're doing it with limited capacity and very limited authority, and at the mercy of member states' willingness to cooperate.
With tensions mounting between the US and China, President Trump announced that the US, traditionally the largest contributor to the World Health Organization, would stop funding that institution.
Leaving the World Health Organization at the height of the most devastating pandemic in more than a century is the height of lunacy. It impedes the US ability to learn from other countries. It creates open season for China to step in and drive the World Health Organization in the direction that China thinks is in its interest. It's a humanitarian blow to vulnerable communities all around the world, which in turn is a blow to US leadership and US influence.
That WHO was deliberately delaying the announcement of the severity, or delaying or artificially underestimating or understating the severity of COVID-19, at least in the early stage of the pandemic. As late as February 4th, the Secretary General of the WHO was still saying that there's no need for a country to overreact to COVID-19.
Just because something is called the World Health Organization doesn't mean it's an unmitigated good that you can't criticize. I've had experience with the World Health Organization since my days in the Reagan presidency, and it's not the lean, mean, disease-fighting machine it was right after it was created in its early years, where it had enormous success.
Mass infection and epidemics are a threat to every city, to every nation. Scientific and medical work on a local scale are no longer enough.
When delegates from around the world convened in San Francisco in the waning days of World War II to outline a framework for global governance, they made certain that health would be part of the mandate for the new United Nations. They recognized that the fight against infectious disease depended on global coordination.
They had experienced the health consequences of the Second World War, of course, and they were very clear that one would only have economic development in the world if one also had a healthy population.
There were epidemics of tuberculosis and other epidemic diseases, and there was risks of dysentery and other risks to health, that people were moving around populations and so on after the war. So it was agreed that WHO would be formed and that there would be international cooperation.
What it tries to do is to provide technical guidance to countries around the world on how to respond to health challenges. It tries to set standards with the input of countries around the world for the response to global health crises, to medical issues, to public health issues.
Even during the most antagonistic years of the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union managed to cooperate on matters of health.
The eradication of smallpox originated with a resolution proposed by the Soviets. It is the only human disease ever to have been eradicated. But think about that. In the 20th century alone, 300 million people are thought to have died of smallpox.
But after a few decades, many observers had grown discontent with the WHO and its broadening mission.
If you take a look at what the organization prides itself on, which is the near eradication of polio, the eradication of smallpox, combating other infectious diseases, these were the focus of the organization in its early days. And the organization lost its focus in the 1970s and 1980s and started focusing on a number of different issues that arguably should be the focus of domestic health agencies and domestic governments.
I remember back in the Bush 41 administration, the early Clinton administration, the global response to HIV/AIDS was taken out of the WHO and made a separate UN component because people simply felt the World Health Organization wasn't up to the challenge. And I think since then, the bureaucracy hasn't gotten any better.
Like many other international organizations, the WHO has no mechanism to enforce its authority and relies on achieving consensus from its member states.
No one gave WHO the authority to enforce compliance. No country wanted them to have that degree of authority, including the United States, so they simply don't have it.
Member states, when things like health security crop up, get incredibly defensive, nationalistic, and the WHO has to navigate. It doesn't have the authority to tell other governments what to do.
It has to also play a political role because WHO can be invited into a country, but they can also be kicked out of a country. We saw this recently with COVID-19, where Burundi expelled 3 WHO high officers. And so WHO has to kind of walk this line.
We have the authority that the member states give us. WHO is what its 194 member states want it to be. And really, it is not a question of exercising authority or compelling member states to do something. It is about persuasion. And that really is how the multilateral system works.
In 2002, doctors in southern China began documenting an alarming outbreak. Patients infected with a new type of virus were developing a condition known as severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS. Faced with the threat of this contagious new virus, the WHO sprang into action.
It had a very strong director general, a woman named Gro Brundtland, who was a former prime minister. And when China at that point was not being very forthcoming with data about what was happening with SARS, she took a pretty strong stance and chastised China and really pushed China to be much more forthcoming about the data that was coming out of the SARS outbreak.
WHO had criticized governments in the past for not being transparent about health emergencies going on within their borders or infectious disease outbreaks, and had been heavily criticized for that. And Brundtland went ahead and did it anyway.
But in the aftermath of the SARS outbreak, the WHO's member states grew concerned about how much authority the organization had appropriated.
The overall reaction from member states was kind of, great job, don't do it again. The naming and shaming function, calling for trade and travel restrictions were all things that made governments uncomfortable more broadly as sort of an infringement on sovereignty.
What came out of SARS was something called the International Health Regulations, sort of a set of rules of the road that WHO and all the countries were supposed to follow in the context of cross-national disease outbreaks. And part of IHR was the idea that WHO should not chastise and really stand up to member states.
As I have said before, and I can repeat, it took much too long time before we got that kind of collaboration to get the data and to know what advice to give and how to help them contain the outbreak. It took much too long time.
There are no IAEA-like authorities within the International Health Regulation, and that was not an oversight. I was on the negotiating side for the United States, and it was a very deliberate decision.
For most of the WHO's existence, it has relied heavily on the U.S. to finance its operations.
Traditionally, the United States has been the largest provider of funding to the World Health Organization, both in terms of assessed funding, which is sort of the dues to the organization, but also in terms of voluntary contributions to the organization as well.
When WHO started, it was mainly these assessed contributions by member states. Right now, we actually have a balance that the assessed contribution by member states are only 20% of the WHO's budget.
About 80% of its funding comes in the form of voluntary contributions from donors, mostly member state governments like the US, but also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a huge one. And that money is largely earmarked, meaning that the donors decide what they want it to be used for.
Concerns about the WHO's independence have grown now that the voluntary contributions controlled by member states make up the vast majority of the organization's budget.
This changed over time because wealthy countries pushed to reduce the mandatory contributions and replace them in some way with voluntary contributions. And the implications for the organization are enormous.
That opens up the WHO to the highest bidder in terms of who provides funding is going to have more political influence. And that was one of the major issues thus far in the COVID response, is that they're really focused on making sure that they don't upset anybody.
Within the past decade, several international commissions put forth proposals to modernize the WHO. Not one of those reforms was put into action.
What is the core of the proposed reform? For member states to provide greater powers of independence for the WHO Director General and his or her Secretariat to collect data, and secondly, to issue warnings, and when data is not forthcoming, to blow the whistle internationally on why that data is not forthcoming. At present, all these reform proposals that have been put on the WHO table have been allowed to drift away by WHO member states.
Now that the COVID-19 pandemic has awakened the world to the potential danger of emerging disease, experts debate whether the WHO needs broader authority to enforce its mandate.
No, the World Health Organization doesn't have any kind of enforcement authority. It really shouldn't have enforcement authority. This is a situation where member states need to come together to work together to pledge to honor certain standards and certain practices.
It's not ultimately just about putting some authority on paper to say the Director General can do X, Y, or Z. It's also about thinking through the steps of why would a member state then actually choose to comply with that.
So if WHO gets the authority to be able to go into China against China's will, then it needs to have the authority to go into the United States against America's will. My sense is this is a nice idea, but countries are not ultimately going to agree to it. Certainly not the United States, not China.
Some critics assert that the WHO is no longer the best organization to coordinate global health.
This was a different virus. This was a house on fire. And WHO is simply not, at this time, geared to be a fireman.
It was created in 1948. There were 48 member states. Now, fast forward today, we have 194 member states. Many of those states are low and middle income countries, and they require very different things from WHO.
We still need the WHO no matter what. We need that official body. But the question is, do we need some complementary entity that would be able to do this inspection or audit kind of approach?
Or will we end up in a situation where we have nothing because the states weren't really able to cooperate with a China that's challenging not only the United States, but the whole liberal world order and its principles?
As the WHO's assessed contributions from nation states have tailed off, some private organizations have stepped in to fill the void.
Its funding is incredibly precarious. It is tremendously underfunded. It has this tremendous mandate to cover sort of all health issues all over the world, and it does that on a budget that's about the budget of a large hospital system in the US.
About 10% of the overall WHO budget is now also financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, again, mainly in focused programs.
USA, 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 USA. With a nationalist tide sweeping the globe, politicians are proving increasingly unwilling to tolerate interference from multilateral institutions. The WHO must figure out how to operate effectively in a difficult geopolitical environment.
There is a rise of nationalism in very many places, and it does affect the WHO indirectly by making some countries less likely to contribute or be supportive of multilateral initiatives.
To what extent the great powers are willing to manipulate international organizations to serve their own cause, to implement their own agenda, that's really the problem. And that's an independent problem from nationalism.
What you have now is nationalist rhetoric, but internationalist challenges. It's not a coincidence that nationalist leaders, by and large, have fared the least well in tackling the COVID pandemic, because they're trying to bring a set of tools to bear that don't take account of our connectedness.
The first step, some experts say, is to evaluate whether China's influence within the WHO has grown too strong.
The World Health Organization was concerned that if it was very critical of China and its lack of cooperation, lack of transparency, that could restrict further the World Health Organization's access to Wuhan and access and cooperation that the Chinese government was getting. So it was over the top in terms of its praise for China.
China has been very skillful at entering and penetrating a lot of international institutions that were really created as part of the liberal Western world order and based on liberal values such as transparency and openness, etc. But China, when it enters these institutions, although it subscribes to them, it signs all the agreements, it doesn't respect the rules.
One of the reasons WHO was subservient to China in the coronavirus pandemic was that a Chinese national had been Director General for 10 years before the current DG. And I think that's a mistake.
Every member state in every international organization tries to get its way. To the degree that China has influence that it should not have within the WHO, that's a failure of the Trump administration and of diplomacy and of other countries to build coalitions to block China's efforts.
At a moment of rising tension between Beijing and Washington, the WHO has become a battleground.
COVID-19 has fallen smash in the middle of a geopolitical conflict between the United States and between China. For political reasons, the United States has held back and has not joined many of these attempts to create a truly global approach.
One of the big worries I had was that if one of the big countries does badly domestically, if COVID really hits them badly, then the big danger is they will then externalize that into geopolitics. And the Trump administration decided the WHO was a good way of critiquing and harming China.
The challenge currently facing American policymakers is to determine how the U.S. can play a leadership role in the field of health.
In a bipartisan way, most people have recognized that investments in developing health systems is an investment in U.S. national security. So I think it is a mistake to go looking for credit if your investments in global public health infrastructure are only about that. You are missing the point.
People don't talk about smallpox anymore because the United States led on this, provided the funding to do that. Polio is another one that we're close to eradicating, and so we know how to do this. It's going to take all of us working together.
Other countries work within the institutions to push back at China, whereas the United States chooses more and more to depart from these institutions, probably because China and the US are main opponents in the world order, and China is trying to push the United States down from being the dominant power in the world.
A lesson of COVID is, maybe the overarching lesson, is that there is no them. It is just us. We are all susceptible to the same microbes. Individually, we are no match for nature, but together we are. I cannot imagine, even now, the US actually leaving WHO. It is, to me, unthinkable.
Going forward, the most crucial question will be what lessons the international community can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic to make sure it responds more effectively to the next emerging disease. Back in 1948, the WHO's constitution boldly proclaimed that the achievement of any state in the promotion and protection of health is of value to all. But today, the stakes for the global community are even higher. In our interconnected world, the failure of any state is a danger to all.
Great Decisions is America's largest discussion program on global affairs. Discussion groups meet online via Zoom.
Okay, sorry about the little technical difficulty that I had there, but I hope everyone enjoyed that. It's a lot to take in, it's a lot to think about. I hope everybody got a chance to read the article in the Great Decisions booklet. If not, there might be a few questions in here that the topics weren't covered as completely in the video as they are in the book, but we'll get through it. So we'll start with our questions. Do you think it was the right decision to re-enter the WHO? What changes should the US seek in the organization with its re-entry? So we did re-enter with the Biden administration. What changes do you think that the US should seek with this re-entry? And in order to answer, you have to unmute yourself, and then when you're done, mute yourself back up again. Anybody?
I do think it was the right decision to re-enter, and I'm less certain about the changes. I mean, we could encourage perhaps after this is a year from now, perhaps we ought to try to spread the costs maybe wider, but clearly we're better off in the organization, I believe, than on the outside. And I thought it was petulant to pull it out.
Does anybody else have a differing opinion or concurrent opinion?
I would say, first of all, I think we should be in, but I think the fact that we were out, we should have, and I don't know whether we did or we didn't, but I think we should condition our getting back in on what we want to achieve and let them say, yes, we approve or we don't approve before we go back in, I think. Because there are some things apparently that are definitely wrong with the organization. And once we were out, we can say, if you want us back in, these are the rules. So I think that was the time to do it. So I don't know whether they did or they didn't.
I'm not sure either. I don't know if they put any conditions on the re-entry. Just reading the article, I learned all about the WHO that I didn't know about, and it's very confusing, and it's like a huge bureaucracy. So I don't really know what to think about it anymore. Yeah.
I would tend to agree with the last point made about us. If we're going to get back in, we ought to have more conditions. I mean, I look at these organizations and we spend a ton of money, and what did we get for it out of all this? I mean, this was a disaster that we have just dealt with. This WHO, what did it actually do during this whole COVID? I mean, this alert got raised, it got shut down. Why would we fund something like this? So to me, if we're going to go on this, yeah, we call the shots. We spend a lot of money. It is to our benefit. And if we're funding it, we ought to be getting our as much as we want out of it. I mean, otherwise, fine, contribute as much as you want the rest of the world.
I know who this is.
I think part of the problem is we do contribute the most. However, it's still only about 15% of their budget, which is, we don't have a an owning stake, I suppose, in it. Like,
It's a big budget and it did nothing.
they're underfunded as well. I don't know if you got a chance to read the article in the book.
All these organizations are always underfunded. So, I mean, it's just, you know, they always call that. The point is, how much are we supposed to fund? Then where is the rest of this funding supposed to come from if they're underfunded?
I think that's part of the question. That's part
it sounded like, according to the article, they've been asking for funds, and the different countries are not stepping up and funding as they're asked to. And I know from like a year ago, I was a part of a book group on the United Nations, and they're having the same problem where they're not getting the funding that they need. And it sounds like from the article that they have all kinds of very good things that they want to do, but they keep getting shut down and they're not really given the go ahead, even though all of the world knows that they need to be doing these things. That's my impression from the article, is that they're not given enough permission to actually act. But then listening to this video, they're kind of warning us that we don't want them to take too much control. But I mean, these pandemics are worldwide. We have to act in unison. We can't just be separate countries. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. And I know with the United Nations that there's potential for improving it vastly and making it actually work, where it's not working as it should. So I'm thinking the same thing is probably happening to the World Health Organization. One thing though about the funding, I'm kind of disturbed by is the private funding, like the Bill Gates. And I know what he's doing is good, but I really don't like the idea of the wealthiest 1% deciding what our values are for us. I don't think that's healthy.
I agree with her.
Okay, well, does anybody else have anything on this one? Otherwise, I'll head on to the next question.
Oh.
Okay, next question. So this was in the article. And if you didn't get a chance to read the article, it might not make that much sense. Do you agree with the proposals promoted in the non-paper on how to improve the WHO? So those proposals, it was I think a German and French study, and they put forth a non-paper. It was also, this is a little confusing for me. I'm going to admit that 100%. They put forth this paper saying that basically, what did they say? It was,
Do you know what page it's on?
I tried to write it
87.
down. Page 7. Okay.
Page 7?
87?
87. Page 87.
Okay. Okay. So the non-paper's key point is the mismatch between the WHO's mandate, and they have lots of mandates, and again, financing. The paper was very much pro WHO, and they're asking for more money and an increase in assessed contributions. So basically they found that the international community's expectations regarding WHO's capacities outweigh by far its given financial, structural, and legal abilities. COVID-19 has to be used as an opportunity to strengthen WHO's abilities to fully act as the leading and coordinating authority in global health. So it was Australia, France, Germany, and the United States they're all doing these non-papers to put forth ideas to try and improve the WHO. So that's kind of the gist of that. What do you think, if you were writing a proposal after you've seen the video and done a little research, what would you propose as a fix? How to improve it? What would be your?
WHO has to have access. They have to have access to the country where it started from immediately.
That's true. Mm-hmm. That was something that China did not give them.
You're going to do it?
I just did.
Anybody else have any ideas?
But how, so that's difficult though, because China refused, but then they were not, nothing was done. I don't know what you could do.
I think that's the crux of the problem, is they don't have any way to enforce anything, and they don't have any way to punish. There's no punitive, way to get these countries to go along with what they're trying to do.
It's called moral suasion, and if we're not part of the organization, we have a reduced, like our position in the other international organizations, where because it's a bunch of sovereign states, we don't have the ability to force compliance. But if we can persuade several other countries to see it in the same way together, then perhaps we can bring pressure on China. Actually, the Norwegian lady, when she was the head of the WHO, and you heard her, and she was very forceful. But what she did was that customarily they can only rely on official information from the country. When China wouldn't give her that quickly enough, she took information from non-GOs, NGOs, or other, and some information that was basically given to her by interested sources, sort of what our newspapers do all the time. But then she published that, and China's nose was out of joint about it, but it was effective. And we were much more effective on SARS, different disease. But you heard that was the line about, that was extremely well done. Don't do that again, because it infringes on what's, and China is more sensitive about having their what's the word I'm looking for? It escapes me at the moment. But they're in control of their own affairs, and they are very unhappy about being criticized.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
I do, Carrie.
Okay.
I was just thinking that one of the complaints in the video was that China, the lady, the head, was there for 10 years. I would think, as a non-starter, nobody from the China, United States, or Russia should be leading this. It should be somebody from Norway or another country that wasn't one of the big power countries. I think it'd be more responsibly listened to than a big country where politics is involved.
I like that. That's a good idea. I like that.
But didn't they say that every country gets was it a vote or I'm not quite understanding that. I'm also thinking that when situations come up that are helpful to, say, the United States or any country, we're going to want those things to go through. But if they challenge us in any way, we're not going to. And I know that's been a problem with the United Nations. And I'm thinking, that probably is happening here too. It's that kind of a big organization of the world.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. We'll move on to our next question. we've kind of been talking about this a little bit. How much control should international organizations have over their member countries? Should organizations like the UN and WHO have authority to overstep local governments? It's kind of a tough question. It's hard to, I don't know. I see both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should be only to get in the country to identify at the start. I think once you start overstepping on health regions, well, I don't know. I think that's a tougher call. But at the initial stage, I think where they can get in there and do the identification of where the issue is.
So like in the case of COVID, with China not cooperating or cooperating fast enough, let's say, then at that time, the WHO could forcibly go in. I mean, that's another thing, like, how would they go in without China's, just using China as an example, without China's blessing? I mean, they have a huge army. We have a huge army. I mean,
and therein lies the problem. How do you enforce something like that? I mean, you would like to think, all countries would do this for their own good, right? For the good of, humanity, to try to assess these type of health things. But the minute you start talking authority, well, how do you enforce that? Mm-hmm. Especially with the bigger ones like China with this whole coronavirus. Well, if they just say, no, you're stuck. What were you going to do? There is nothing you can do. And I think that's the problem with this. It's like, you'd like to have pressure, but it's almost a question you can't answer.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I find it a very hard question to answer one way or the other.
Yeah, I guess the idea would be that there'd be pressure from all the world on that one country that's doing whatever it's doing.
Super easy on Sri Lanka or whatever, right? Just not on, I guess, even us, although maybe we would actually go for it. But, you start dealing with the Chinas and they, to me, they've just not demonstrated a willingness to necessarily be on the level of countries.
Or transparent. I mean,
yeah.
I feel like when the WHO did go in, maybe it was that January, February, when China finally let them in, they still weren't allowing them access to everything. And they kind of gave up on their study because they couldn't get all the information needed to put out a complete and comprehensive study of where coronavirus or COVID-19 started. So
I forget if they gave up or did they just say, oh, it's fine. I mean, that's far worse, right? Giving
right.
up is,
I feel like I did read an article where they I don't want to say they gave up, but they put it on the back burner and didn't want to put out a report because it wasn't complete and it didn't get to where they didn't ever find out like where coronavirus was transferred from animal to human.
Yeah. I think too, and it is so important that you have this, I guess, global cooperation, because if this is going to work, I mean, look at how the borders are just so different these days, right? Things just transmit so much more quickly with the way the world works. And if you're not going to have this kind of participation, I mean, these organizations become so minimally effective. You can do the research, you can do whatever, but if we're talking authority here and trying to really, have a coordinating board or coordinating entity, it fails the minute you've got people who don't want to participate. And how, again, you go back, how do you enforce it?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's also different kinds of health systems from different places. I mean, I know in this country we have our regular health care system, but we also have people who heal outside of that system and who would think that there are things you can do to build your system up with so you don't get so sick, which is not really talked about a whole lot. We're really we keep hearing about vaccines all the time, but we don't hear about how we can strengthen our bodies. Not that it's going to work all the time either, but you know what I'm saying with that? And
Yeah. There, I mean, and just the way that different health systems work in general in all the different countries too, they have to take that into account. Okay, shall we move on? Okay. Yeah, this is another tough question. Should the main function of the WHO be to prevent any future global outbreaks like COVID-19, or is it better for the organization to have multiple different interests? I think that's a tough question.
personally, I think it should have multiple different interests because right now the pandemic is horrible and it's taking over our lives, but there are other things that are also that need to be worked on, and we can't ignore those either.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. Part of me thinks, with these other interests, can markets take care of some of these things? The pursuit of, you don't want to say profit, but marketplaces will take care of some issues maybe more efficiently than a government body. And when you look at something like a pandemic, I mean, that impacts everyone, and that's where it is handy to have this kind of coordination, this kind of ability to have a more coordinated response, having maybe, quote, the best minds all working together. I don't know. It's again, it's a hard one to say. My initial thing is just given what we've seen this last year, I would focus on these big things because these really are the end game type of scenarios, and they really do so much more damage than some of these other things. But to your point, it probably is good to have some other interests. But gosh, what we've just seen this last year, it's really hard to, in my view, to say otherwise than just plan for how to deal with these things because nobody else seemed to do a very good job.
Yeah, and kind of building a little bit on what you just said, we were both nationally in the United States and worldwide, we were we'd let all of our fire extinguishers, if you will, metaphorically, run out, and they were all out of date, and we lost them. We didn't know where they were, all that sort of thing. And so right now, this has hopefully focused our attention, and we can make some meaningful preparation for the next pandemic, because surely there will be another. It might not be 100 years the next time. And but the multiple interests, I think somewhere at some level, people need to, the managers need to realize that some of these other interests are just almost are away from, or they're a secondary interest. And so maybe some of the talent needs to be working on that. But when something like a pandemic occurs, all that stuff can be shelved, and these people and their talents have to be put into the point of resisting and learning more about and studying the COVID-19 or the next pandemic.
Yeah, and to your point, the next pandemic, I mean, this one is terrible, right? What if something is far worse? I mean, that's the thing too. It's like, you've got to have a better response, because if it's far worse, I mean, we are really in trouble. It's bad enough what this has done, but if it's worse, I mean, you're talking just, wiping, who knows what out at that point.
I would agree. It's hard to say that they should only focus on pandemics because, we're not affected here in America by Ebola or Zika so much, but there were other epidemics that the WHO helped to quash, I mean, and they did bring up, smallpox and polio. I mean, this is, they have done really great things and almost eliminated these awful diseases. And then, but also, when is the next pandemic going to happen? And we need to really be prepared so that it doesn't get worse. You know, good points, but you can't answer that question in a black and white type of answer. Okay, next question. What would be some of the drawbacks, if any, to increasing the role and authority of most international organizations? And we kind of talked about this a little bit, where you know, overstepping bounds. How are you going to actually enforce things? But yeah, what would be the drawbacks of increasing the role of, say, the UN or the WHO and others?
Historically, we've been willing to cooperate, and you know, the history of World War II. It was sometimes a struggle about who was going to be the supreme commander in the theater, but in fact, we interacted, interfaced with other forces, and there was some friction, you know, getting the frequencies deconflicted and some of that sort of thing. But it really works remarkably well. But we tend to only be willing to do that sort of thing in a sort of a crisis mode. So when the war is over, we all want to go home, and rightly so. And I think in a democracy, that's perhaps the best we can do.
Yeah, that's pretty dangerous, though, just to react rather than to be proactive so that things don't happen. And then you are in a crisis, and then you have extreme situations happening in a crisis.
I guess, you know, when I look at this with role and authority, I mean, we're sovereign nations. You know, we're not one, you know, a one world order or whatever you want to call it. So in a way, when you start increasing authority, well, who, you know, we're not necessarily being represented at that point. You know, we've elected individuals, or we've chosen the way we wish to be governed. We start, you know, centralizing these things. It's just different than how we're structured, how we're formed. Yes, if it's in the common good of, you know, like health, for instance. I mean, that is a common need for everyone. But, you know, when you start having decisions made that maybe go against, you know, your sovereign best interest, is it really good or not? And again, we can all take the selfish view there, but it's just difficult to say that we're going to have this body that is not something we selected and that somehow has been arranged, detached from us, running the show for us, and to what level it's running the show for us. So I think that's, to me, the drawbacks with these kind of things.
And who would be in charge, and how would that person, you know, you always have to have somebody in charge.
Yeah, you know, you'd like to think that these organizations are done on behalf of the common good, right? That they really are, they have the best interests of others, but I don't know, they just get bureaucratic. They just get, you know, weighed down by maybe conflicting interests. And it's like, how much do you want to see to this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, great point. That's kind of how I feel after learning more about the WHO. All right.
In moral terms, I guess that would be called original sin. I gotta just share with you this book, Emergent Strategies. It is about new ways of problem solving and away from an authoritarian system. And
I've heard of this book.
Yeah, the author, she's a young Black woman. I think she lives in Detroit now, Adrienne Marie Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's pretty interesting. She's talking about fractals right now.
Interesting. Did you get it at the library?
No, I bought it. I think you should have a copy though at the library.
Probably do. Well, that was our last question. So does anybody have anything else they want to discuss or add to our discussion this evening?
Yeah, I actually would like to make one comment. Way back, Gene, you had made a comment about like Bill Gates.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting point there. It's like, you'd like to encourage that kind of capital coming in, because if we're so running out of money with these kind of things, this is a great way to have that kind of substantial capital involvement. On the other hand, if that comes with strings, is that good? So it was a really interesting point you raised on that one. Part of me is like, if you're going to earmark it for certain things, I suppose, but how much influence does say Bill Gates have on this kind of thing? I haven't read about his full involvement on this whole coronavirus. I know there were some articles, and I can't, maybe the validity of them is not good or not, but you start seeing like, oh, well, he knew about this kind of thing well in advance, and he didn't do enough, or this benefits him. I don't know on that, but it's just, you raise a good point. It is an interesting thing to think about, and it's like, to what level of control are we allowing those kind of big individual donors to have on this? You'd like to think that they donate and walk away, but it's never quite how it works.
Yeah, I was just talking to a group of people earlier this week, and they mentioned Bill Gates kind of pushing genetic engineering on Africa, and
it sounds creepy.
Not a good idea. What?
That does sound creepy.
Yeah.
Where did can I ask, where they read or heard this?
I just read it myself too. I don't know. I don't remember, but yeah. I don't know. I have so many sources that I go to that they all kind of swim around in my head, and I can't remember anymore. Might have been Yes Magazine. Might have been some webinar I was listening to about agriculture. I don't know. Might have been. I don't know.
Okay, just curious.
Sorry, don't know.
I hadn't heard that, but it does sound creepy.
I'm surprised you haven't heard that, because gosh, I've been hearing it a lot.
Really? Yeah. No, I have not heard that he was pushing that in Africa,
or I don't know. I think Africa, but I mean, and the question is, why is he buying all that agricultural land in the middle of the United States?
Oh yeah, see, I don't know about that either.
Yeah, why? I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't.
And this is not what's the word? It's not like crazy thinking. I'm not a crazy thinker there, but I am wondering why because we are losing arable land. Dust is blowing and we're losing the topsoil.
Mm-hmm.
So he's making a lot of money. He's ahead of things. He knows what's going on.
I think with some of these like other interests too, like we were talking about just a couple minutes ago, you look at some of these and it's like they seem to always be fighting them in the same area. It's like, let's take Africa, for example. I mean, it's always Africa, and we can just never get a good foothold on health in that continent. It's just, how do you do that? What, how much money, and you don't just say back out of it and just, leave it alone, but look at all the efforts that keep getting made there, and it just never gets better. And so when we talk about countries trying to participate in this and trying to have, a common good, in a way, they just, that area just refuses to ever do anything. They just, and we just keep trying and trying and trying. And it becomes a bit of a, is the World Health Organization focusing on something there that just is never solvable? And again, you can't, for the sake of humanity, stop. But look at that. That's a distraction in a way, that if you're going to throw all those resources versus we've got this big pandemic. I don't have an answer to that, but you just see that kind of stuff continually happening. That is never going to get better there.
I think part of the problem with Africa is so many of their governments are extremely corrupt.
Exactly.
Extremely corrupt. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't have the answer for that. But unfortunately, what I have read about some of the governments in Africa, some of the countries, I don't think they have the well-being of their citizens in mind at all. And therefore, the only one who is going to help them is the WHO.
And you're right, but we go back to that whole part of authority. So let's just say there's, we've got Ebola, we've got whatever going on in those countries. If they don't want you in, what are you supposed to do? To try to eradicate that, to get those things taken care of. That's the big, obviously why the nature of this topic, the great decisions. We just don't have the ability to enforce that kind of thing. So I don't know how you do it yet, but it seems like, we're getting sort of distracted with those constant efforts there because those countries refuse to do what's, in the best interest of their citizens, whereas if we could get, a better grip on that, yeah, let's get on the big things here, like these pandemics, because that is the stuff that really should be, we're getting close to smallpox, we're getting close to polio or whatever, wiped out, whatever we've done there, but yet those things keep existing there. You hear about, diseases that haven't been around here for decades or hundreds of years that still exist there because they just don't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really sad.
It is.
And I think, I don't think there's an answer, but when it comes to governments in Africa, more than the government, the government of China, the United States and other wealthy countries can put pressure on those governments to comply because we can put sanctions on them, just like we do in the Middle East. We have some pull, not always moral pull but we have some kind of pull. Whereas like with China, we don't really have any. We don't have anything we can hold over them, if you know what I mean. And
right.
I don't want to say that that's the right way to do it either, but it seems like that's the way things have somewhat been done. So we kind of got off topic, but that's okay. Well, so next week we have the end of globalization. So we're kind of going to be talking about the same thing a little bit next week. I will be here again next week. Next week will be our last Great Decisions program for the year. So if you get a chance to read the article, it does always help understand a little bit better. But if you don't get a chance, that's okay too. And hopefully next week I will have figured out my computer a little better than tonight. So again, sorry about that little whoopsie in the beginning. But if nobody has anything else, I just want to thank you guys so much for coming tonight. And I hope you learned something and enjoyed the conversation. And I hope to see you guys next week.
Good. Thanks again, gang.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you. Good night.
Bye.